You want thorough analysis, we're hard to beat. We supply the info to help you compete. Make the state of the meta your primary tool. Subscribing to us keeps you from being an April Fool.
It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we walk through the Week 8 recap of Karlov Manor Standard. Alrighty folks, Tier 1 kicks off this week with the usual suspects. Dimir Aggro rose to the top once more, followed shortly by Temur Ramp's continued climb up the pile. Boros Convoke pushed through a minefield of smaller events. Esper Midrange just kept on placing people into top 8s, and Domain hung on with a strong win on Friday night.
Oh yeah, and Tier 2 features Azorius Control pilots still holding their ground, only to be joined by Rakdos Aggro, making a minor resurgence, and a spicy new Dimir Control list to evolve. Stay tuned, because you're going to want to see how the Control players are defending the dojo.
And last but not least, Brewer's Corner highlights the continued Proft experiments, this time in Azorius, a Sultai Ramp list that doesn't require 72 cards, a Boros Control deck that needs no burn, preferring to grind instead, and a Golgari Roots deck with Temur Ramp vibes.
Rebels, as you know, we've partnered with TOAMagic on our State of the Meta series. For those of you who aren't already using TOAMagic for your paper needs, click the link below in our description, head on over after the video and check out their store. Now while you're there, don't forget to use code REBELLION to get 5% off at checkout.
As always, TOAMagic can deliver all your cards in one package with free track shipping on every order and over 1 million fulfilled orders to date. Gang, it's very simple. You can support this rebellion by purchasing cards using this code, and the best part is this company has been used, verified, and trusted by all of us in the community. So if you want some cardboard, click the link, use our code, get your 5% discount through us while helping support us. Everybody wins.
Oh yeah. Now onto our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Dimir Aggro.
Andrew1232 took down the 85-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with Dimir Aggro, marking the first of 3 trophies collected by Dimir Aggro this past week while helping 13 different pilots push into top 8s. Now, let's take a look at what shifted here. We see a fairly typical build in the main, with all the usual suspects in the form of disruptive early flyers, Gix, Preacher for the snowball effects, couple of Shellys and Urtais towards the top end, and an Aclazotz at the very top, grinding it out. The sideboard, however, has pushed into Spell Pierces instead of Negate, signaling an intent for early disruption against decks like Domain and Temur Ramp, opting to sacrifice late-game stability for early-game tempo. The single copy of Hearse is there to help clean up against Temur Ramp as well, and of course the Disdainful Strokes will help against both them and Domain. Boros Convoke will face triple Glistening Deluge and a single cut down off the sideboard, along with that second copy of Aclazotz in all likelihood. Now, overall, this list isn't revolutionizing anything or evolving much, just tuning those final 3 to 4 flex slots on the board and focusing on proper sequencing as we get to the end of our Karlov Manor season.
All right. I do see Tishana's Tidebinder. Is that card effective coming in against Temur, or is it there for the usual suspects?
I mean, you can rock it against Temur if you're trying to catch an Aftermath Analyst trigger or a Nissa trigger and just, turn them off, but at the same time, I don't think it's great there. I really don't. I think you want to be on trying to hit them hard, trying to disrupt, using those Spell Pierces, Disdainful Strokes, Hearses, and just all that early momentum with the Flyers to try to keep it all in check. I really prefer to go that route. I think Tishana it's just a false hope, a red herring.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying for our viewers. That's a tempting card to bring in against Temur. Speaking of which, let's talk about Temur Ramp.
TXB smashed a 91-player MTGO challenge this past Sunday with Temur Ramp, signaling the rise of this archetype all the way to the top of the metagame. Now, let's note that the top 4 was all Temur Ramp pilots, by the way. This archetype took 12 pilots into top 8s over the course of Week 8, including 2 total trophies, which was easily enough for Tier 1 status. So let's see what changed this week. Now, first, note that the single copy of Doppelgang is in the sideboard instead of the main board, which, if we're being honest, it makes a lot of sense. We're not yet at the stage of main board unlicensed Hearses and Stonebrains, so we don't really need a second win con for Game 1 in all probability. Let's also note that the absence of Shigeki in the main shows that, once more, this isn't a list that feels the need to loop in Game 1, relying instead on the raw power and maximizing that before we get to the lengthier post-board games, where you need a few fillers, so to speak, ways to recur, ways to, get back into it after they play some counters, right? 2 Vampire Vengeance in the main signals that this list is aiming to stutter step those Convoke and Aggro players, and given the presence of Deep Cavern Bat, I'd agree with this move. And lastly, the 2 copies of Kellen in the main as Growth Spiral with a little defensive backend does seem strong, especially in the mirror where ramping becomes a very big deal.
Spicy. Vampire's Vengeance. Wow, that really does seem like a well-placed card for the current meta. However, is the deck okay with only 2 copies of Fallaci Archaeologist, no main board Jaces for the self-mill?
Yeah, I don't think we need those alternative wins in the form of Jace, and that's really what Jace and Shigeki were trying to do, was to create that loop where you could Jace and mill them out, and we don't need it. We've got World Souls, we've got the ability to go over the top with mana. I just don't think it's as necessary, and similarly, that's why I don't think we need Fallaci Archaeologist as highly. We're really opting to try to blow up the board state and keep them from having the disruption, so that's why those Vampire Vengeances are getting pushed in, and I agree with it, because the hardest matchup for Temur Ramp is going to be Hyper Aggro.
Okay, talk to us about Boros Convoke.
Stay Conf took down a 12-player MTGO preliminary this past week with Boros Convoke. They were one of 11 pilots in various top 8s throughout the week, but it's worth noting that Boros Convoke failed to convert any trophies at larger events despite showing dominance in preliminaries. Nonetheless, 11 pilots in top 8s is enough for Tier 1 World once more. Now, this list follows a tried and true formula, but notably took 2 flex slots normally given to Sanguine Evangelists number 3 and 4 and converted them over to 2 copies of Witchstalker Frenzy. So I'm going to go ahead and guess they got ranched by a Shelly 1 game too many and decided 6 removal spells in the main just felt better than 4. And this sideboard is what I love most about the list, honestly. The split on Lithomanic Barrage and Destroy Evil is far more balanced in light of the continued dominance by Esper Midrange and Domain. Those 3 Thalia, 3 Anointed Peacekeeper, 2 Kitsil's Flanker, and 3 Urabrask's Forge push back against Temur Ramp while paying dividends against Domain and other control decks. So overall, what I like about this Convoke list compared to the others is you see a ton of balance in the sideboard, and honestly, it's just about time we saw a more modal sideboard plan for Boros Convoke. Just an excellent step forward overall.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I love that this deck is still evolving, but what do you make of the lack of trophies for this deck in recent days?
Honestly, when I look at the lack of trophies, I think that this is a list that is great to grind at the local level. It's going to be fine there where people aren't like very prepared for it, but when you get to those bigger tournaments, you're going to see variants play a bigger role, and that's going to be a problem for the Boros Convoke list, because if you don't run hot with aggro and people are prepared for your plan, you run into a lot of L's really quickly. And, you know, like Boros Convoke week 1 felt amazing. I took down a tournament with it, right? It felt great. But here we are, it's week 8, going into week 9, in fact. And it's a known entity. It's a known quantity. People are prepped for it. People have sideboard plans for it. And it's hard to deal with all of the hate that's coming in, especially as Mono Red's fallen off a cliff. And this is the premier aggro deck that isn't running blue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Talk to us about another deck that has seen quite a bit of success over a long period of time, Esper Midrange.
So Makimi got the trophy with Esper Midrange in a 21-player BOA qualifier this past Sunday, making them one of 10 different pilots to claim top 8s with Esper Midrange this past week, but the only one to take home a title. So this list's main board has cemented into what we see here, with a sole copy of Tishana's Tidebinder in the main board, really the only question mark. Placed over the 4th copy of Throat Goat or the 3rd copy of Fairy Mastermind, as we're used to seeing. It just depends on the meta for which of those two you're going to see. Now, the sideboard is well tuned, though honestly, I look at this knockout blow and I question how much do we need that with Mono Red falling off of a cliff. It feels like that was set up for more of a local meta, and I'm just not sure that that's the right call if we go into a larger tournament. But I like where the rest of this is, because this is a very balanced list. It's well split, it's well divided, it's got game against every archetype, it comes down to sequencing and variance to a degree.
Yes, beware of your local metas, folks. Sometimes some of these lists are geared towards local metas. Just a note when you're seeing these lists and copying them down. Now, one card I see, Shrouded Shepherd. You don't hear a whole lot about that card. Would you like to see more of these in place of the knockout blows?
So I really like Shrouded Shepherd if we're seeing a Bant Toxic heavy kind of meta. I don't love it as much against Convoke because a lot of their creatures have 2 butts, right? Like you'll hit the Gleeful Demolitions, you'll hit the Epicures, but you're missing Wardens, you're missing the Inspectors, and you're missing literally everything else up the curve. And if they play a War Leader's Call, you're missing everything. So
Yeah.
I don't love Shrouded Shepherd against Convoke. I think 2 damage is really the sweet spot there. 3 if you can get it.
I couldn't agree more. Talk to us about 5-color domain.
Sorry I'm So Tilted won Friday night's 54-player MTGO challenge with Domain. What a name, by the way. Well played.
Yeah, for playing domain.
Right? Capping off what was otherwise a fairly quiet week for the archetype, as it placed only 5 pilots into top 8s over the course of week 8. Now, that's enough to stay in tier 1 land, but barely. So Domain's really close to going down to tier 2. And the main board of this list, if we look at it, it's stabilized with 2 Spelunking, an Imidane's Recruiter, and 2 Depopulate. And that just seems to be where most people are at. Most people are hedging a little bit with those Depopulates. They're keeping a couple Spelunkings. We're still on the 4 Beanstocks, and we're still on the 1 Imidanes instead of Nissa. The sideboard, however, it shows a more balanced and nuanced approach, featuring the temporary lockdowns for Boros Convoke and Tempo lists, those Elish Norns for the Mirror and Convoke, flankers, negates, Stonebrains for Temur Ramp, and Long Goodbye for Dimir Aggro and Esper Midrange. Again, we're seeing modality in the sideboard, with most cards being positioned to come in against multiple matchup and just serve as the key role players that they're going to be in those matchups.
Yeah, and you'd think with such a wide set of answers, this deck would get more play. But why are less players, electing to play domain? Is it just a bad time for domain?
With Temur Ramp coming in, I think it is. What Domain really had going for it was that it was the big baddie. It was the Ramp deck. It was the deck that went over the top of everybody and had inevitability if the game went long. And it did such a good job of keeping the control decks in check that Temur Ramp emerged and said, okay, anything you can do, I can do bigger. Virtue of Strength, giving you essentially 3 mana per basic, and by the time you're playing it, you're going to have at least 7 basics. That's 21 mana. That's right there. Game, boom, bigger than Domain. Atraxa looks nice, but World Soul Rage hits for way harder once you have Virtue out.
Yes, absolutely. All right, that does it for our Tier 1 archetypes. Let's jump down into Tier 2, where I'll kick things off with Azorius Control. Now, Suspicious made it to the top 8 of Sunday's 91-player MTGO challenge using Azorius Control. Only one other pilot made a top 8 with this archetype last week, which maintains its continued status in Tier 2. Main board Jaces provide a win con for this version of the list and a way to mill out Temur domain opponents. We also see that Dissipate has been replaced this week by Disruption Protocol. Notably, there are some, like the Sunfall tokens, there are some artifacts you can tap out to do that with. However, most notably, the deck introduces Ezram and Hullbreaker Horror win cons into the main. We saw last week how Azorius struggled, and perhaps this is a way for the deck to make a statement. I am curious, though, why these instead of the typical Hornlock Whale that you see in that slot. I know Athena would recommend the Hornlock Whale, especially with that modality of turning away attackers. So I don't know. That's a curiosity on this list, but Hullbreaker Horror has certainly shown its merit in the past in past Azorius Control lists. So interesting to see it here.
Fair. And I look at this list, Max, and I see Hullbreaker Horror, and I'm with you. I'm kind of wondering, why are we going this far up the curve? And I mean, personally, I'm thinking it's for Temur Ramp, because the ability to just play any spell and bounce back that World Soul's Rage is a big deal. That's what I'm guessing. But when we get to the sideboard, those Pithing Needles, what's going on there?
So it could be safe to assume that these are also for Temur Ramp, right? I think it hits Aftermath Analyst as a triggered ability. They could also be for Jace or Wandering Emperor, as Pithing Needle's been known to be effective against Planeswalkers and other formats as well. We remarked last week how the longer a meta goes, the more precise control decks get in suppressing the right strategies. I'm guessing that Azorius pilots sort of felt put off by Temur Ramp and threatened by that deck this past week. So I'm guessing that's a response to Temur.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, the fact that you're able to hit, opposing walkers as need be, that's not a bad thing. Occasionally people are running some weird stuff, or you just in the mirror want to hit those Wandering Emperors as they hit. And, I get that. But we're going to move on. We're going to talk about a little Rakdos Aggro back from the dead for your viewing pleasure.
Let's go. Linden43 took Rakdos Aggro to a top 8 in this past Friday's 54-player MTGO challenge, following it up by placing 9th the following day in the 85-player MTGO challenge. One other pilot made a top 8 with the archetype this past weekend. Now, the list features full sets of several what I would call aggressive cards. I question the full set of NT. I like NT. I do. I just question the full set. when there's really not too many reasons for, reanimation, for example, no reanimation effect to speak of in the deck. One Gix's command can also retrieve some of those discards, I guess. But other than that, there's not really any graveyard interaction. Nonetheless, these NT push into a full set of Preacher of the Schism. So, that might be a good reason for that card. 3 Gixes, 4 Shellys make this deck dense enough in the mid game. The opponents will really need to interact strongly with the deck right away and early before card advantage snowballs into swings of life totals. 2 Aclazats also seal the game on the top end if the opponent has basically used up all their removal on the way to that. So we've seen this aggressive Rakdos strategy work in the past. No need for any complex play lines, especially when no one sees it's coming.
That's fair. Now, Max, I looked at that sideboard. There were 4 Lily of the Veil. There's 4 Hidetsugu. What's going on here?
Right, I think we have a shell-shocked pilot.
Okay.
That's really the only possible explanation I have for 4 Lilianas. This is not the sort of standard you typically expect to see 4 Lilianas of the Veil. Not with Dread Knights, Boros Convoke going around, Toxic still out there, Control. But, by the same token, Hidetsugu seems like a decent card if you're aiming for Convoke with some other points against Toxic, Mono Red. However, to devote all 4 slots when you have a densely packed 3-drop slot, it's not a choice I'm sure I would make. I might instead opt for Glistening Deluge, as you see in other sideboards. That card also gains you points against Domain with the Herd Migrations, and Esper with specific builds of Esper. So I'd opt for something leaning a little wider into the meta, like Glistening Deluge, but that's just me.
Fair. And I mean, we saw some results from it, but we'll have to wait another week and see if it just keeps panning out or if this falls off a cliff and never to be seen again. But there is a new contender, and I can't wait to talk about it. So let's get over to it. Max, tell us about Dimir Control.
All right. Fair MTG made it to the semifinals of Saturday's 85-player MTGO challenge with Dimir Control as one of 2 pilots who managed a top 8 finish with this fresh take on the deck. Much like the Azorius Control build we saw earlier, this list also features 2 main board Jaces with an additional Jace in the sideboard. These combined with the full set of Deadly Cover-Up signify how much Temur Ramp has breached the meta, in my opinion. Deadly Cover-Up, of course, helps you get rid of some of those key pieces in their graveyard. Malicious Eclipse in the sideboard is also an intriguing option for aggro decks. 2 Shellys, 2 Aclazats in the sideboard as well make up some more aggressive options. I'm guessing specifically aimed at the mid-range and more aggro matchups.
That makes sense.
Not sure.
That makes sense. And I just want to point this out before I get into my question. Deadly Cover-Up, gang, if you counter the first World Soul's Rage, you can use Deadly Cover-Up on a blank board, collect evidence, and exile all those World Souls, and that's it. They're out of World Souls. It is still just Cranial Extraction for 5 mana if you have the evidence to collect. And people seem to forget that, but I've used it for that many times. Now, the real question here, Max, why Malicious Eclipse instead of Glistening Deluge?
Yeah, I was just talking about Glistening Deluge, huh? This deck, unlike Dimir Aggro, doesn't need to play around its own creatures. Eclipse hits all colors equally, including, the Rakdos decks as well. So, I don't know. I think that's probably part of the reason is you want to hit 2 rather than just hitting 1, versus hitting 3 on 2 colors. So, be able to hit all colors at -2. So, I think maybe that might be why.
Fair. And with that, we're going to turn over to our Brewer's Corner favorite segment every week. We're going to kick things off with a little Azorius Profts. So, credit to Sir Stinkfist of the MTG Rebellion Discord. Initially came up with the idea for this, and then I slammed together a few alterations. We talked a little bit about it in the Discord. And by the way, if you're watching this, join. Come to the Discord. You want to talk about Magic? That's what we're doing all day, every day. This list, to me, feels like we're taking the Dimir Proft list, and we're kind of smashing it into Convoke a little bit with those Warden of the Inner Skies, and we're trying to get into the air really fast, really early. But I also love in a Proft list like this the ability to toss these counters onto Warden, which does not differentiate what kind of +1/+1 counters it takes to become a flyer with Vigilance. So you get the benefit of that. You also get these clue tokens to draw cards to trigger Profts, which is kind of nice. And we get a couple of these helping hands here to just bring these early hitters back because they're going to target them. Last but not least, Welcoming Vampire. Now, the original list was on Takasia's Welcome. I think Welcoming Vampire is a little bit stronger here. We have the ability to discard it to Steam Core Scholar, and it works out nicely there, but it also just draws you cards to trigger Profts. continuously once a turn. It's wonderful. I love where this list is at.
Yeah, if you put any 1/1 counters on it at all, it can evade cut downs as well. So that's an interesting interaction too.
That is a fair point.
But let's move on and talk about Sultai Ramp. Credit to Hard Conan of the Rebellion Discord. This deck pretty much sees what Temur Ramp is doing and does something similar, but in what I would consider more meta-friendly colors. You have access to Bats, you have access to Path of Peril, Jace. So with those cards, this deck shores up a little bit defensively in the main against some of the more common archetypes we're seeing right now, including Temur Ramp and Aggro. Titania is here as a one-of that can be fetched, notably using this as ability. We've also got the Celestis here, churns cards into your graveyard, keeps your life total up, especially against aggro. And then really instead of the World Soul's Rage, you've got Slogurk back as part of the win cons, sticky threat, can win you the match. It's also always nice to be able to play the legit cost for Atraxa and not have to sneak Atraxa out. And this deck aims to do just that. Just play Atraxa in the raw. And there's enough card types here that you're going to get quite a few more than you would in the Gruul colors, in my estimation, or in the Temur colors, in my estimation. So.
Yeah, it's a spicy list. I love that it's splashing an Elish Norn off the sideboard there too. That's really fun. It's just not often you get to see that fourth color get splashed in so eloquently, and this is a list that can do that, and it doesn't struggle with it, which is original, to say the least. That said, we're going to move it along, get to our third deck on here, Golgari Roots. So, credit to Mao Diddy Mao of the MTG Rebellion Discord for tossing the list our way. This is kind of a wild one. All right. So again, Aftermath Analyst, I'm seeing this card everywhere right now. I'm seeing it in Explorer lists with Omnath and Yorion. Like it's gone everywhere. Everybody's trying to do things with Aftermath Analyst. Here's yet another iteration that's trying to mess with that. And it's also using Insidious Roots, which is kind of fascinating the way they're trying to mess with this. Mosswood Dread Knight, if I remember correctly, triggers Insidious Roots when you cast it from your graveyard as an adventure. So that's fascinating. We have the ability to go that route. But other than that, these outrageous robberies, like this to me is the best robbery list because you're going Virtue of Strength into robbery. Like this is mill them out, and if you don't mill them out, you got like 20 cards anyway. You got like 20 cards. God. And that's what you look at it and you're like, where are the threats? You don't need them. They have them. Take theirs. Take theirs, play theirs. That's what this deck is doing. This deck robs harder than anybody else if it gets Virtue of Strength going, and I'm here for it.
That is indeed spicy. I'd love to see that in action.
Right.
But let's go over to That Ryan Guy 85 contributing Boros Control. All right. Boros Control really might be the deck for the moment. I mean, it features 8 pieces of single target removal, full set of Get Lost, full set of Lightning Helix. So life gain ain't bad, especially in light of, aggro. You've also got 1 Brotherhood's End, 2 Depopulates, and a full set of Sunfalls to make up all the board wipes in the deck. Plenty of board wipes. Armies in a can, right? We got Wedding Announcement. We have Wandering Emperor. And then Appraiser notably can play into Wedding Announcement, Find You Removal. Discover is awesome. Quintorius Kond is in here as well as a 3-of. Discover 4 into Emperor or Appraiser, and then continue the chain. The deck tops out at Chandra and Eternal Wanderer. Eternal Wanderer also notably another board wipe and army in a can. So the sideboard here includes Lockdown, Forge, along with other one-of staples in Boros colors. You've got Barrages, Knockout Blows. Elish Norn notably, again, that card is seeing a lot of play. So the hate is real in Boros Control. It's got a lot of hate packed into the sideboard.
Yeah, and I think part of why we're seeing Elish Norn is, again, because it messes with Temur Ramp. The ability to turn off all those land triggers is a big deal. Now, before we get to our final segment, I just want to put a little note out there for people. Here's your little spicy tidbit. If you have Chandra Hope's Beacon out and you're in an older format that has Approach the Second Sun, you win the game when you cast Approach the Second Sun, because the copy will resolve first, and then the one you cast from hand will win you the game. Found that out the hard way this week.
Wild.
Yeah, got ranched by that this week. So, for those of you looking for a little spice and Explorer, there you go. And that will bring us right back to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 9 of Karlov Manor Standard?
I've been seeing more and more comments, and some members of the Rebellion call for the death of Temur Ramp, just calling for us to hate this deck out of existence. Calls to hate out this archetype have been heard loud and clear across the meta, it seems. How will Temur respond? Will we see it evolve? Will the haters win out? Now, while all the attention seems to be on hating out that list, which list will rise from the ashes and climb its way back onto the tier list? Nobody's looking. Is there a new list out there that is yet to make an appearance? That's my real question. Will a version of Proft, either in Dimir, Azorius, maybe Esper flavors, pop up and breach the meta? I think so, actually. One of them is bound to. Stay tuned. It ain't over yet for shifts in the meta before the next set. Brewers are anxious for a change, but only you can make it happen. What's around the corner for Standard, though, in your view, Darth Riktus?
So, I mean, brewing isn't dead, but it looks like we have our tiers mostly set as we await new cards from Thunder Junction. Of note, with Temur Ramp rising rapidly as we approach the end of this season, I'd expect an emphasis to be placed on Dimir Aggro as the premier choice for pushing back against it. The disruption, the tempo, the wall of counters, postboard, like everything positions this archetype in a strong spot moving forward, especially as it's already got a coin flip matchup with Esper Midrange and tends to be favored against Domain. It's a little early to formally call it, but my prediction is end of the season, Dimir Aggro's at the top of the heap.
Oh, wow. Okay. Pretty bold. Now, thank you for your support, watching this video to the end. I want to give a special shout out to our members who've joined the Rebellion, support our content weekly. Thank you guys so much. If you'd like to support what we do, be sure to turn on all notifications, join us for our premieres, like and subscribe. Those are really the best ways to let us know that you want to see more of our competitive MTG content. Now, for those of you who can do a bit more, feel free to check out our merch below, join the Rebellion. We are working on our subscription tiers, adding new incentives, so be sure to pay attention for any announcements in the future.
And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.